Iran's latest move shouldn't be seen as a sudden reaction. It looks far more like a calculated strategy designed to send a message and test limits at the same time. When Iran takes a step like this, it's usually planned well in advance, with timing and impact carefully considered. This isn't about acting out of emotion. It's about creating a controlled situation where the response can be measured. By doing this, Iran is watching closely how the United States and Israel react, how fast they move, how strong their response is, and whether they choose to escalate or hold back. There's also a deeper layer to it. Moves like these aren't just military, they're psychological and political signals. Iran is essentially communicating to both allies and rivals that it still has reach, influence, and the ability to shift the situation at any moment. It's a way of reinforcing deterrence without immediately triggering a full-scale conflict. In other words, it's not just about what happened, it's about what could happen next if pressure increases. At the same time, this kind of action fits into what experts often call controlled escalation. The idea is to raise tensions just enough to force a response, but not enough to cross into all-out war, at least not immediately. Each move becomes a test, and each response becomes data for the next decision. That's what makes moments like this so sensitive. Because even though everything appears measured on the surface, the margin for error is extremely small, and any miscalculation can quickly shift the situation in a much more serious direction. The speed of the response from both the United States and Israel says a lot about how seriously they're taking the situation right now. This wasn't the kind of delayed, cautious reaction you sometimes see in global politics. Instead, it appeared immediate, coordinated, and highly alert, suggesting that both countries were already prepared for something like this to happen. When a move triggers that kind of rapid shift, it usually means intelligence agencies had been tracking rising tensions and possible scenarios ahead of time. For the United States, responding quickly is about maintaining credibility on the global stage. If Washington hesitates in a moment like this, it risks sending the wrong signal, not just to Iran, but to allies around the world who rely on U.S. security guarantees. That's why even a measured response still needs to look firm, controlled, and ready. Military positioning, surveillance upgrades, and strategic communication all become part of that immediate reaction, even if they're not fully visible to the public. For Israel, the urgency is even more intense. Given its geographic position and long-standing security concerns, it operates on a much shorter response window. When a potential threat emerges, the expectation is not to wait, but to act quickly and decisively. That's been a consistent pattern, where rapid response is seen as a form of defense in itself. Any delay could be interpreted as vulnerability, which is something Israel tries to avoid at all costs. What makes this moment especially sensitive is how synchronized these reactions appear to be. It's not just two separate responses. It feels coordinated, almost like a shared understanding of the stakes involved. That level of alignment indicates just how high the alert level is right now, and how little room there is for hesitation when tensions are already this elevated. What's happening right now goes far beyond a regional dispute. It's starting to ripple into global systems that affect everyday life, especially for an American audience. When tensions rise between Iran, the United States, and Israel, the impact doesn't stay contained within the Middle East. One of the first areas to feel the pressure is global energy. This region plays a critical role in oil production and supply routes, and even the hint of disruption can push prices upward almost instantly. That directly affects gas prices across the United States, transportation costs, and eventually the price of everyday goods. Beyond energy, global markets tend to react quickly to uncertainty. Investors don't like instability, and when conflict risks rise, you often see shifts in stock markets, currency values, and trade flows. Companies that depend on stable international shipping routes start preparing for delays or increased costs, especially if key waterways become risky or restricted. This kind of tension can quietly influence supply chains, leading to slower deliveries or higher prices without most people immediately realizing why. There's also a broader strategic layer. The Middle East sits at the center of major global trade and military positioning. When conflict risks increase, countries outside the region, including European allies and Asian economies, start adjusting their own strategies. That can mean increased military presence, new alliances, or shifts in diplomatic priorities. The United States, in particular, has to balance its involvement carefully because every move it makes sends a signal not just to Iran, but to other global powers watching closely. All of this turns what might seem like a distant conflict into something that has real consequences worldwide. It becomes less about a single event and more about how interconnected systems, energy, trade, security, and economics, start reacting all at once under pressure. What stands out in this situation is how quickly military actions are evolving, not just in scale, but in speed and precision. The pattern that's emerging between Iran, the United States, Israel, shows a shift away from slow, calculated buildups toward rapid, near-instant responses. Decisions that might have taken days or even weeks in the past are now being made in hours, or even minutes, driven by real-time intelligence, satellite monitoring, and constant surveillance. This acceleration changes the entire dynamic of conflict. When responses happen this fast, there's less time for diplomacy, less room for de-escalation, and fewer opportunities to step back and reassess. Military systems are already on standby, meaning that once a trigger event occurs, the chain reaction is almost automatic. Fighter jets can be deployed within minutes, missile defense systems activated instantly, and cyber operations launched without any visible delay. It creates an environment where action becomes the default response rather than the last option. At the same time, the level of precision in these operations has increased significantly. Modern strikes are often targeted, designed to hit specific assets, infrastructure, or strategic points rather than broad areas. On the surface, this might seem like a way to limit damage, but it also lowers the threshold for engagement. Because actions are more controlled, leaders may feel more comfortable authorizing them, which can lead to more frequent exchanges rather than fewer. Another layer to this is the integration of different types of warfare happening simultaneously. It's no longer just about physical strikes. There's cyber warfare, electronic disruption, intelligence operations, and psychological pressure all happening at once. Each move is part of a larger, coordinated effort to gain an advantage without necessarily crossing into full-scale war. But the more complex and fast-paced this becomes, the harder it is to manage because multiple fronts are active at the same time. This combination of speed, precision, and multi-layered operations creates a situation where escalation can happen almost unintentionally. When every side is reacting quickly and pushing forward on multiple fronts, the chances of misinterpretation or overreaction increase, making the situation far more volatile than it may appear on the surface. What makes the situation even more complex is that it's no longer limited to just Iran, the United States, and Israel. Other countries are now getting pulled in, some directly, others indirectly, based on alliances, security concerns, and regional influence. This is how a localized tension slowly transforms into a broader geopolitical situation, where multiple players start reacting even if they're not at the center of the conflict. In the Middle East itself, several nations are closely watching and adjusting their positions. Some governments may quietly support one side through intelligence sharing or logistical help, while others focus on strengthening their own defenses to avoid becoming the next target. Even if they're not launching strikes, their involvement still shapes how the situation evolves. Military bases, airspace permissions, and regional coordination all become critical factors that influence what each side can or cannot do. Beyond the region, global powers are also paying close attention. Countries in Europe and Asia have strong economic and security ties to the Middle East, so any instability there immediately affects their interests. They may not be directly involved in military actions, but they can influence the situation through diplomatic pressure, economic decisions, or strategic partnerships. This adds another layer of complexity, because now decisions are not just being made based on regional dynamics, but on global calculations as well. There's also the role of non-state actors and allied groups. which often operate in the background but can significantly impact the situation. These groups may act independently or in alignment with larger powers, creating additional points of tension that are harder to predict and control. Their involvement can expand the scope of the conflict without any official declaration, making it feel like the situation is spreading in multiple directions at once. As more players become involved, whether openly or behind the scenes, the chances of miscommunication, overlapping actions, and unintended consequences increase. What might start as a controlled exchange between a few countries can gradually turn into a much wider and more complicated crisis, simply because there are too many moving parts and too many interests at stake. What makes the current situation especially dangerous is just how fragile everything has become beneath the surface. When tensions reach this level between Iran, the United States, and Israel, stability doesn't disappear all at once. It weakens gradually until even a small incident can trigger a much larger reaction. Right now, the margin for error is extremely thin, and that's what makes every move so critical. In situations like this, decisions are often made under pressure, with limited time and incomplete information. Leaders and military officials have to interpret signals quickly, whether it's a radar detection, a sudden movement, or an unexpected strike. The problem is that not every signal is clear, and not every action is understood correctly in real time. A defensive move by one side can easily be misread as an offensive escalation by another, which can lead to a rapid chain reaction. There's also the issue of communication gaps. While official channels do exist between major powers, they're not always used effectively during moments of high tension. Sometimes messages are delayed, unclear, or influenced by political considerations. When direct communication breaks down, assumptions start to take over. And in a high-stakes environment like this, assumptions can be dangerous. Each side begins to prepare for the worst-case scenario, which increases the likelihood of further escalation. Another factor is the pressure to respond quickly. No country wants to appear weak or unprepared, especially in front of both allies and adversaries. That pressure can push leaders toward faster, more aggressive decisions, even when a more measured response might be safer. The need to maintain credibility and deterrence often competes with the need to avoid escalation, creating a constant tension in decision-making. All of this creates a situation where control becomes harder to maintain with each passing moment. The more actions and reactions stack up, the more unpredictable the environment becomes. Even if no side initially intends to trigger a larger conflict, the combination of speed, pressure, and uncertainty means that a single miscalculation or misunderstanding could quickly shift the entire situation in a much more serious direction.